Hello, my name is Madison Polly, and I'm going to be doing my informative speech on Jane Austen and her 6 most popular works. Jane Austen was born on December 16th, 1775 in Steventon, England, and she passed away on July 18th, 1718 in Winchester, England, and she was 41 years old when she passed away. Her cause of death was Addison's disease, which is a disorder where the adrenal glands don't produce enough hormones. Austen had 7 siblings, and they were called James, Francis, Charles, George, Edward, Henry, and Cassandra. Jane was the 7th child born of 8. Jane never married, but it was suspected that she agreed to marry a man named Harris Bingwither, but backed out the next morning. People often wonder why a woman who obviously loved romance as much as she did would never find her own husband, and some speculations were that she loved another man and he passed away and she could just never consider marrying somebody else. Alright, and according to Britannica, Austen's first known works date between 1787 and 1793. In this period, she wrote a wide array of things such as plays, verses, short novels, and a lot of these actually survived in 3 manuscripts called Volume the First, Volume the Second, and Volume the Third. Alright, and now we're going to go on to Sense and Sensibility, which was Jane Austen's first published novel. It was published in the year 1811. It was actually published anonymously, so where her name would have been on the title page, it actually just read, instead of saying Jane Austen, it said by a lady. And Sense and Sensibility is the story of 2 sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, as they come of age. Alright, and Pride and Prejudice was written in 1813, and it was published in 1813, and it was Austen's her second published novel. And Pride and Prejudice is one of the most popular books in the world today. Austen originally called this book First Impressions, and the novel follows Elizabeth Bennet and her 4 sisters as they enter the marriage market. And according to the Jane Austen Society of North America, in 1797, Austen's father, Reverend George Austen, believed in Jane's work so much that he wrote a letter to London's publisher Cadell and Davies offering to send them a manuscript of Pride and Prejudice if they were interested in publishing it, but they actually refused it and rejected. This copy of Pride and Prejudice right here, it's the most popular cover art today, and people often try and recreate it. You'll see copies with peacocks and peacock feathers decorating it. But this is the original, and it was illustrated. It was the first illustrated copy of Pride and Prejudice, and it was illustrated in 1895 by Hugh Thomas. He got the idea of the peacock. Peacocks are like notoriously known for Pride and Prejudice, but they're actually not mentioned at all in any of Jane Austen's works, especially Pride and Prejudice, which it's the most famous for. Hugh Thomas decided to go with peacock feathers on the front because he felt like it really encompassed the mood of the book. There were actually only 275 copies of this version ever printed, and it sells for ridiculous amounts of money today. Alright, so on to Mansfield Park. It was published in 1814, and it's Austen's 3rd published book. So the first edition of this book was published by Thomas Egerton, and it sold out in 6 months, according to Digital Austen. Austen wrote this book based upon her own family and their lives in Steventon, and she hoped that nobody would recognize the similarities between the characters and her family. This story follows a young girl named Fanny as she navigates through her adolescence and young adulthood, and this is the most controversial Jane Austen book. So now we're on to Emma, which was published in 1816. It was actually the last book that Jane Austen published before she passed away in 1817, and it follows Emma Woodhouse, a self-proclaimed matchmaker, as she finds love even though she says she will never marry anybody. And yeah, it was her 4th published book right before she passed away. Now we're on to Persuasion, which was published in 1817, right after Jane Austen passed. It was one of 2 books published in this year. Persuasion follows Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth. Anne refuses Wentworth's proposal, and she's persuaded by her family to reject him. But after she rejects him, Anne loses all of her happiness. And when he ends up coming back into her life later on, her youthfulness and her happiness begins to return. Now we're on to Northanger Abbey. It was published in 1817, and this was the last book published in this year, and it's published right after her death. It was actually Austen's first novel completed in full in 1803, and it follows Catherine Morland and her journey to a better understanding of herself and the world around her. Thank you for watching. This was my presentation on Jane Austen and her 6 most popular works.